Well, in this presentation, I will try to help you to understand the development and the genesis of the French NQF. And to do so, I have to go back to history and to go back to the 70s, in fact, the early 70s. You can see above all the reference dates I will mention in this presentation, and they are all reference to the development of the French NQF. So if we go back to history, we can mention that the French NQF is totally employment-oriented. That's what we say, every person concerned for employment. And no matter what the period, just to say that principal tools and practices were existing since the 70s, but not all of them. And in fact, there was a turning point in the beginning of the 90s, I will mention later. This history is also the history of the recognition by the state of ever more varied set of qualification. That means at the beginning, the state recognized only its proper qualification, and then we will see that it will recognize informal qualifications. So, the beginning of the 70s, the context was that one, an economic growth, low employment rate, but a lack of qualified workers, especially technicians and engineers. And that was the reason why we were looking for tools to measure the need of educated population at a certain level of education. So at that time, qualified means educated and graduated. So the type of qualification recognized were the qualification issued by the state, and especially by the Ministry of Education. We call that period in France the state education, or the heyday of Ministry of Education. So these are the qualifications recognized by the state, the only one. And we can consider them as said Horace previously, qualification awarded in the school system. So this is the tools we built in 1969 to match our need of qualification to the jobs, in fact. As you see, this match can be seen as in a sentence like requiring a level, jobs normally requiring a level of training. And this classification is based on training duration. For example, at level 4, it's just the end of secondary education. Then level 3, 2 years after secondary education. Level 1, for example, 7 years after secondary education. Then, in the beginning of the 70s, so with the law of 16 July 1971 on the organization of continuing vocational training, the law creates a new commission called Technical Commission for the Accreditation of Technological Training Program. This commission was under the authority of the Ministry of Labor, which is very new in France because the previous qualifications recognized were issued by the Ministry of Education. This commission was under the authority of... So the new type of qualification accredited. In fact, there is two periods beginning with the CTH. This one, the 70s, so where types of qualification accredited were other ministries' qualifications, and public association qualification. For example, the training program issued by the Association for the Promotion of Adult Learning, which was created in 1947, so such a long time, were not recognized by the Ministry of Education, and they were recognized in 1972 by the CTH. So these learning programs and training programs were accredited, we said, by the CTH. So we can find in that period a second type of qualification, already called state-regulated qualification, awarded outside of the school system. So this is the second period of the CTH, with the mass youth unemployment, and government is looking for every means to struggle unemployment. So to develop training of adults and work experience. So in that time, other types of qualification were accredited by the CTH, private providers qualifications, and in 1986, what the creation of the sectoral qualifications in branches. So this type of qualification can be called private market qualifications. These sectoral qualifications were developing in the 90s, in fact, and at the end of the CTH, they were 2 or 3 accredited, not so much. I mentioned something. In fact, the 90s were a turning point for the French system, because since then, the CTH accredited training programs, but in the 90s, there is a new doctrine, in fact, that say that learning outcomes must be accredited and no more training programs. In 2002, with the law of social modernization, a new commission is created, the CNCP. This is a translation of the CNCP, so I bring it from the site, from the website, National Committee for Professional Certification. It has to manage a register. Manage means to implement and to update. This register is called RNCP, National Register of Vocational Qualification. In fact, the context of unemployment is also increasing. So the register, to be included in this register, we have very strong criteria, in fact. Only vocational qualifications are allowed to apply, in fact. Vocational means in French very strong, as in French very strong signification. We said une qualification. It means that qualification must lead to a full-time occupation, must be recognized in the labor market. So this qualification can't be for personal development. So we built a new typology of qualification. We saw before the state-regulated qualification awarded in the school system, outside of the school system. We saw also the private qualification, and we built a new typology since 2032, based on the ways the qualification could be registered in the French register. So it's by law and on request. The qualification that can be registered by law have to be issued on behalf of the state and on the recommendation of advisory bodies. In advisory bodies, you will find at least representative of employers and employees. The government decided to write in the law that the negotiation between employers and employees have to be written in the law. So it's the reason why we defined a new type of qualification, and this negotiation became very important. So you find the formal qualification on vocational secondary qualification. This one issued by the state, generally, but with advisory bodies and other ministries like culture, labor, for example, agriculture. The qualification that can be registered on a request, they are very different. They can be qualification issued on behalf of the state without the recommendation on advisory body. It concerns Ministry of Defense, for example, Ministry of Culture, of Ecology. Private qualification, in French, it doesn't mean private provider's qualification, because a provider can be public or private, and sectoral qualification. The cost of inclusion are free in France because its registration is considered as a public service. So all public and social services are in France free of charge. But obviously it has a cost for the applicants. Just to give one or two details about the procedure of inclusion. In fact, there is 3 steps in the procedures of inclusion. This is not this. Eligibility, appraisal, and the recommendation. And there is 2 types of examinations, a national one and a regional one. The national one is for training providers or qualification providers acting at a national level, and a regional one for training providers acting at a regional level. And in the 3 steps, the two first steps, so eligibility and appraisal, can be made at a regional level or a national level. In fact, there is 2 types of appraisers, national and regional ones. The last step is the recommendation. It takes place at a national level, and registration is made with 4 very important criteria, in fact. So the first one is relevance in terms of occupation. It means is there an occupation which have to be supplied, and which one. Education to work transition is also the most important, I think, nowadays. And we ask providers to provide through years students in fact, is to say what is the effectiveness of the qualification? Do you find a job with that qualification? What sort of job, with what status, and what is your salary for 3 years after obtaining the qualification? Then the providers have to describe precisely learning outcome to be assessed and to be trained. and they must describe so precisely and implement accreditation of prior and informal learning procedures. So there is a specificity of the French system, legal status of the qualification registered. So these qualifications belong to the body that created them. They are not public, even if they are registered. So that the bodies which are responsible for the conditions of use. If a training provider wants to prepare to a qualification registered, we must ask the body who created it to prepare it, and so they made some arrangement to do this. So because of this, I think French system is encourage the creation of qualification, and so there is a high risk of qualification overlapping nowadays. What means inclusion in the register is a process to be assigned a level, and the classification used until now is a classification of training levels of 1969, which is based on training duration. This is a contradictory to the principle of the CNCP, but a new classification is now quite ready, but not implemented yet. Only sectoral qualifications, which are in the register, are not assigned a level. It was at first a request from the branches. So in 2010, with a referencing report to NQF, we matched, in fact, our level in the nomenclature of 1969 with the ones of the NQF. For example, a PhD is placed at level 8 of NQF, and it's level 1 in our classification. A bachelor placed at level 2 in our classification is placed at level 6 in the NQF. In 2014, a new law related to vocational training, employment, and social democracy. In a context of very high, a new crisis and very high unemployment, decide to develop employability. So it's also a concern of unemployment, and create what we call an inventory. This inventory is not in our NQF, and it's for what we can call, because there are very different additional qualifications. It means they are additional to a qualification in a French word. Some things that can be added to find a job, for example, and we found in this inventory TOEIC, electrician accreditation, for example, and so other different things. The specificity of this inventory is that the examination to be included in the inventory is partly delegate to organization of employers. They have to bring their trust to the qualification, and it's an important criterion to be included. that law of 214 creates also a sort of partial qualifications. In fact, all qualifications registered in the RNCP must be divided in block of learning outcomes. And this block can be prepared in a new training leave we called personal training account. Donc, you can pass a part of qualification with this personal training account. So to sum up the different periods I mentioned, in '69 we created classification of training levels, still used today to classify the qualification in the RNCP. The qualification recognized by the state were those issued by the state and the Ministry of Education, so they were awarded in the school system. In '72 is the period of recognition of other ministries' education, specifically the Ministry of Labour. 86 was the recognition of private qualifications and sectoral qualification too, and a very important turning point, the rise of the learning outcome-based approach within qualification. And the Commission is, since that time, recognizing not only training programs but learning outcome-based qualification. In 2002 was created the National Register, and in part, the recognition of sectoral qualifications. Then, last period, the inventory and perhaps the transition of partial qualification, what we call it France block of skills. So if we want to tell one or two things about further developments, we have two issues in front, I think. Are we going toward a new conception of our qualification? Because of that, this partial qualification and inventory qualification, and what regulation we have to imagine to face or to prevent a formal balkanization, because in France all things were done to avoid partial qualifications and part of qualifications. So because of the meaning we had of full-time occupation and so on. And so overlapping. Thank you.
Yes, I'm working for the CNCP, but at the same time, former, I was in the private sector. So I want just to stress also what Josiane said and wrote about the central role of the state, even if there is this recognition more and more of the private sector, and as we can see, but at the same time, when you are in a private sector and you want to apply or submit in order to be recognized that your qualification is in the system, because you need this, otherwise your learning program are not financiated, so it's really necessary to fit in the system. So you have to formalize and structure all your qualification as the state recommends you to do. and for that there is a help because the people who are working for the CNCP help the private sector for that, so it's quite pedagogical work, but it's really necessary, and I think it's important in order to make the objective clear of the system, which is to give people a certification, a qualification, which is truth. It means that there is behind integration in the work market. It's not empty. That's the sense of that. It's to make people access to a true or relevant qualification. Okay, thank you.